Warning, the following video is rated M for if you're young, you shouldn't watch this, so viewer discretion is advised. But hey, I won't tell if you won't. Just an FYI before we get started, this video will be mostly spoiler-free. I will not be talking about any of the major plot points or events that could possibly ruin the overall experience of the game. However, I am going to be diving into some of the nitty-gritty details of Nocturne, such as the combat design, basics of the plot, and yada yada yada. But don't panic, I'm not going to spill and smear the beans all over the place, alright? People, relax. Moving on! Talk about going back to your roots and getting smacked with a fully grown tree. So I beat Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, and boy, do I have a lot to say about my experience through a game with more history and infamy than I know what to do with. And while Nocturne's existence is nothing new, I want to be able to do an overall review while explaining my thoughts and feelings about this bittersweet pain train. But of course, what I have to say has probably been said before somewhere in a way more detailed long Reddit thread from someone who is clearly smarter than I am, but that's not the point. The point is that Nocturne is a game that isn't talked about that much on YouTube anymore, at least not in the mainstream, which is a real shame because this title deserves to be acknowledged as a commonly known PS2 classic that is still brought up today to use to shame modern gaming tropes. As in like, oh man, this is how gaming used to be and these games know what was up and oh my gosh, why can't we go back to this and yada. But instead, I'm talking about it. But to catch everybody up, what in God's name is even Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, or also called Shin Megami Tensei the Devil's Lettuce or something, I don't know. Now, diving into some history for context, Nocturne is the third mainline entry in the Shin Megami Tensei series, which came out originally in 2003 in Japan, and then had a director's cut version released in 2004 in the West, which is the most popular version and the one we're going to be talking about since the extras and goodies in this one are what the kids call neat. Actually, fun fact, you want to know where that featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series meme came from? Well, it's from Nocturne's director's cut, because yes, the game does feature Dante from the Devil May Cry series, because Atlas did a joint thing with Capcom for the lulz, so yeah, he's in the game kinda, just doing his thing, so I don't know, the more you know, I guess. Now, the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, created by Atlas, has a lot under its umbrella and has been around for a very, very long time. And because of this long, expansive lineage, SMT is definitely one of the biggest precursors to JRPGs, more so than Final Fantasy or Pokemon. So they kind of know what's up when it comes to making a JRPG, even if they never reach the quote-unquote ultra mainstream in the West. But because Shin Megami Tensei is so broad and tends to make each installment its own separate thing, along with its many spin-offs, there leaves a lot of room for experimentation, and Nocturne is the byproduct of that creative freedom. The game was drastically different from its predecessors, mainly because of the time gap between the installments, but with a new engine, perspective, combat, design, the whole shebang. Nocturne was such an important, influential installment in the franchise because aspects of the game are still showing up into Atlas's other more recent titles, as well as other games outside of its genre. But even though Nocturne is considered one of the behemoths of its genre, the game has remained a cult classic for a plethora of reasons, most of which I'm going to be diving into this video, but do know that this game is niche and niche for a reason. Now, allow me to tell you all the things, so let's jump into the ever weird, ever dark, ever gentle and soft Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. So normally I like to start with stuff you want to know out the gate. Is SMT Nocturne good? Yes, but with a little asterisk next to it. You see, Nocturne is a good game for accomplishing the things it tries to do. Heck, I even say the game is great with how much it succeeded in doing, considering most of the game is brand new ideas for the mainline series. Now, I can't say without a doubt that Nocturne is a Japanese role-playing game in every sense of the word. You like deep risk versus reward turn-based combat while kidnapping demons who flirt with you and or want to bite your head off? Nocturne is for you. You like long, intricate labyrinth dungeons that require you to pay attention to the tiniest detail to make your way through? Nocturne is for you. You like dark, mysterious, simplistic plots and a general sense of dread and apathy in a cold, unforgiving, violent world? Nocturne is for you. You like skinny anime boys who are on a grand adventure to save the world with the power of friendship with waifus, cute characters, and long movie-like cutscenes and dialogue? Nocturne is not for you. You see, the game is on the other end of the JRPG spectrum because, let's be honest, it's an incredibly broad term that doesn't tell you a whole lot except for the fact that people in Japan made it and there's probably a lot of numbers involved. But this is a title very gameplay focused, so if you don't like labyrinths and turn-based combat, Nocturne will drain you fast. But I can say the thing that will grab anybody who does like this kind of stuff is the game's atmosphere. Yes, there is a story, and I'll get to the details of that soon, but Nocturne has one of the most dense atmospheres I have ever experienced in a JRPG. From the character design, to the world, to the color palette, the music, everything about this game feels complicated, unworldly, and mysterious. Tone is a big factor here because it's something you can sense throughout. But with that being said, no, this game is not for everybody. everybody. In fact, I can say that if you are not used to JRPGs at all or unfamiliar with their little antics, you should not start with this game because it will do nothing but frustrate you. Accessibility is the word of the day here, a word Nocturne isn't too familiar with, because one thing you will inevitably hear about this game, if talked about, is that it's hard. A common joke beaten shamelessly to a pulp is that Nocturne is the Dark Souls of JRPGs, a statement that isn't at all accurate since Nocturne came first and the games barely have anything in common. But it does carry some baby truth because the game does not hold hands. Now, difficulty in games is a rather subjective topic. Some may fly through this, some may pee their pants on contact, it all just depends. But I can say that Nocturne is challenging, but its difficulty comes from two things. One, vague explanations, and two, RNG from hell. Now, I'll cover these things more in depth later, but do have some peace of mind that yes, the game is challenging, but it does give you all the information you need to figure things out if you pay attention. Like, actively pay attention. So by no means is it expecting you to do stuff that isn't within the game's bounds. Although, I can say a guide will make stuff way smoother, and also water is wet. Go figure, when doesn't it make things smoother? Now, what's nice about this kind of game design is that if you have more patience than the game, you'll be able to get through just fine. It's not like an action RPG where your mechanical skill level will keep you from winning. It's turn-based, meaning if you take the time to get stronger and explore around, you'll be okay dandy. It's a numbers game after all. Talking to people, exploring the areas thoroughly, having bigger numbers than the other dudes, and basic understanding of the combat equals you win. Nothing much more to it. The game is tough, but not the toughest I've played, and it's very manageable. But with any challenging game, winning feels good, so if you like getting the crap kicked out of you only to eventually grind your teeth so hard they burst into dust, Nocturne is a bucket filled with rewarding gameplay. Now, for a disclaimer, I did beat the game on normal modes, so me talking about the difficulty might seem like I don't understand how the game really is, because Nocturne does have an infamous hard mode that separates the men from masochists who have too much time on their hands, and people love to brag about how that's the real challenge. And to that I say, yeah, who knew that playing the game on hard mode makes the game harder? Literally anything can be hard if you tie one hand behind your back and play it using your ears, so congrats on knowing that the hard mode is indeed hard. Reading is tough, I know. But assuming you play the game on normal, be ready for some commitment because Nocturne is over 50 hours long and ain't for the weak-willed. You want to enjoy this game, you gotta go in with the right mindset. But if you are big on the JRPG scene for its mechanics, this is a must-play, and this is up there with one of the most memorable gaming experiences I've had in a long time. But I'm preaching to the choir. We all know that Nocturne is good. How is it to get so many people to kiss its feet for so long? But JRPGs commonly rely on that story to keep people interested, and this is where the game's strength and weaknesses are. So, no secret, Nocturne is the third title in the Shin Megami Tensei mainline series, but fear not, you do not need to know anything for the previous games to understand the plot. Now, understanding the lore is a little different since SMT lore is older than me at this point, but if you're looking at the bare basics plot, Nocturne is an original story and anyone can pop into it. But to give you a quick rundown, the game follows a group of people in Tokyo who all happen to be at the right place at the right time, because 2 cult members, 3 students, and a journalist all walk into a deserted hospital one day, and conveniently, the cult members summon the apocalypse, aka the conception, and everyone outside of the hospital gets sucked into the void, or dies or something, and the rest of the world is basically turned inside out, inhabited with demons, and put in a we'll wait for further instructions state. Now, this sounds like a spoiler, but it's really not because it happens like 20 minutes within the game. Anyway, you play as one of the students who Lucifer, as in, you know, the devil, decides to infuse with a Magatama, or whatever, I might be pronouncing this wrong, please bear with me. Basically, a big demonic parasite just like Mom used to make, turning him into a human who can use demon powers, the unofficial name being Demi-Fiend. So with your newfound abilities and glow-in-the-dark body, you set out on a journey to find your lost friends and to harness enough power to find your own reason, trigger the creation, and shape the new world to your will, or someone else's will if you don't feel like thinking for yourself for today. So needless to say, Nocturne takes a standard JRPG trope and flips it around. Normally in games you fight to prevent the end of the world, but Nocturne starts off with an ending, and then you have to go from there. Now, I did give a very short synopsis, but the thing about Nocturne is that after the initial character introductions and the conception going down, the plot comes to you in little snippets. It's a blunt, straightforward story with minimal cutscenes, main character interactions, and the occasional exposition dialogue dump. Your goal is to just get powerful enough to create a new world, and rarely do you get derailed from that task. So if you're expecting some long-winded character-driven epic with big events and whatnot, you're in the wrong place. The Demi-Fiend is a blank slate. Most of the other characters' development happens off-screen, and you're just left with the aftermath, and the big plot points are few and far between. But that's not to say the plot plot is lacking though. For a game like this, you don't particularly need an overly complex plot. You can easily write off the story's intentions as less is more. But where Nocturne makes up for its content in the main plot is in the world building, atmosphere, and the people you meet along the way and the choices you make. Main plot aside, you are the demi-theme thrown into a new, tough, unforgiving world, and it doesn't really give a crap that you're the protagonist. Everyone is rather apathetic towards your presence and is already off doing their own thing, and so are you. Now, even though you're in the aftermath of the world ending, it doesn't really feel like a normal apocalyptic setting because the demons are just going about their everyday life. Like history rewrote itself and jumped 100 years into the future. There's new cultures, groups, species, bath towel hillbillies, all just living life like this is how the world has always been. Inside out, dusty, and full of highways. But you'll be amazed at how quickly this sets the tone. Not to mention, stuff is just interesting because SMT lore is rather unconventional compared to standard stories. It's darker, less predictable, and weird and wacky sometimes, to say the least. For reals, the game may look really serious on a surface level, but once you get rolling, you're gonna get sidewiped by some stupidly funny moments and jokes, mainly involving the demons and side characters you'll inevitably meet. Good to know comedy made it through the apocalypse. Now, Nocturne is also a very open-endish kind of game where it's a build-your-own-adventure in a way. Throughout your experience, you'll be able to make pivotal choices in dialogue or by exploring the world enough to where you unlock different paths, and depending on these factors, parts of your experience will change. There's a big focus on philosophy here. The whole point is to side with the reason, solitude, harmony, elitism, freedom, etc., etc. Now, some people are obviously heartless, ruthless, and with receding hairlines, but there is no wrong answer in Nocturne. I found the game most fun when I could answer questions based on my personal beliefs because I wasn't worried about a crappy ending. Like, the world's already destroyed, what's the worst that can happen? Although there is a true ending, but you play how you want, alright? You have fun. The point is, the plot is minimal because it is up to you to shape. Because it's a Japanese role-playing game, y'all. Emphasis on the role-playing part, you feel? All in all, I can say it's not a plot that you get super emotionally invested in because of the minimalistic approach, but it will keep you interested because of how open and unconventional it is, along with trying to understand the more mysterious elements of the lore. While I normally get pulled in faster with stories that have more fluff and in-your-face substance, Nocturne will grab you by the pants and leave your shirt behind, if you know what I mean. It's strange, it's cool, and gosh dang it, it's good. But where Nocturne puts a lot of its effort is in its world design. When it comes to basic game progress, Nocturne can be described as a semi-linear open world, where you unlock more of the interconnected areas in the world as you progress, and you can return to most areas once you make your way through them. Now, after your fun little happy time field trip in the deserted hospital and the world gets sucked into the vortex, you're gonna be thrown right into the thick of what Nocturne is about. You'll eventually get access to the overworld, where you can move around and explore the various areas in the apocalyptic wasteland, but in order to unlock more of it, you'll need to go through dungeons blocking your way that you were told to go to. It's a very rinse and repeat process. You navigate the overworld, go to the places you need to go, make your way through the dungeon, fight some bosses, meet some characters, and then you move on. Now, what's nice about all this is the freedom involved. Yes, you can just plow through the areas that progress the story, but nothing is stopping you from exploring or returning to older areas. Granted, there is some backtracking involved with the story, but you can go off and do whatever you want via the teleportation devices in every area. From extra dungeons to revisiting shops, side bosses, you open up the world on your own terms. Now, as for how the overworld is structured, I like it. It's not the most innovative thing I've ever seen since older JRPGs have done stuff like this before, but it gives you a more grandiose sense of the world state. Being able to see everything from a more open, non-constricting point of view is a nice contrast to the dungeons that can feel a lot more claustrophobic. Basically, I like being able to see the thing I'm about to go into. It makes stuff more immersive, especially since it's a pretty full-looking overworld. The Vortex world got a lot going on. Of course, when it comes to knowing where to go in the overworld to progress the plot, the game does take the simple approach and leaves little verbal breadcrumbs to get you there. There isn't like some big flashing neon sign showing the way. It does require some exploring to find the right path, but NPCs can normally point you in the right direction to finding the next area or dungeon. But when it comes to the dungeons, main story related or not, this is where you see Nocturne's true colors. The best way to describe the dungeons are just straight up labyrinths. They are long, winding, puzzle-filled areas with new gimmicks all the time. Some are more complicated than others, but 90% of the time your goal is to just make your way through or find an item or defeat something at the end. The structure may be a rinse and repeat process, but the dungeons do keep things incredibly lively, both aesthetically and mechanically. Each area has a super unique look. Some are more traditional looking places, while others got that weird color vibe going on. The areas just never look the same. However, despite their cool aesthetics, once you start navigating a dungeon, you'll find it really easy to get lost in, since a lot of the hallways basically look the same, minus like a ladder here or an extra door there. So unless you check your map and compass religiously, you can bet your sweet bippy you're gonna get turned around without noticing for a long time. Speaking of which, thank God there is a map in this game, because without it, I would have pulled my hair out, because assuming you're trying to figure out the dungeons blind requires a lot of trial and error and and retracing your steps. Again, each dungeon is unique, and figuring out how each area's gimmicks works and how to make your way through requires you to mess up a few times to see what's up, unless you get like hella lucky and happen to pick the right way the first time, which can totally happen, believe me. But from flipping areas upside down to avoiding shadows to sneaking past the Pixie Mafia, you're gonna be doing a lot of running around finding the right way to go. There were even a few cases in the game where I had to write down a pattern map, like trying to keep track of which rooms I was supposed to avoid or which door would change the dungeon's layout. It's those kinds of puzzles, guys. But don't think you need outside knowledge to figure stuff out. Again, the game does give you all the context clues or information somewhere in the game to make it on your own if you are willing to look for it. Nocturne is definitely one of those games that does get more fun the more you replay it, because you'll know the dungeon's gimmicks off the back of your hand after the initial playthrough. They kinda stick with ya. But actually finding the solutions does require mega patience, pattern recognition, and attention to detail. If you're an easy solution kind of person where you like the game to spell it out for ya, God help you. A bulk of Nocturne's content can either be pegged as frustrating or rewarding. It just depends on the amount of effort you put into the game, because it does expect a good chunk of it. However, I never felt like the dungeons were too frustrating, with a few minor exceptions. Let's see!
What's behind
But what makes the dungeons more challenging than they really should be is the constant interruption with battles. So let's take a stab here at the combat, because Nocturne takes the normal turn-based gameplay and gives you something a lot more interesting. Now, before I dive into the details as to why I love Nocturne's combat, let me just say one thing I don't like. Random encounters. Again, you are a lone dude running around strange areas desperately trying to figure out how the heck you get out, so when you are constantly taken out of that to fight battles when you'd rather focus on the puzzles can get incredibly annoying. Yes, there are items that lower the encounter rate, sorta. Yes, there is a compass that flashes red when stuff about to go down. Yes, you can just straight up escape from battles whenever, and yes, you can fight your way through and grind as you navigate the labyrinths. But I don't like it when Final Fantasy does it, I don't like it when other JRPGs do it, and I really don't like it when Nocturne does it. Now, am I saying all random encounter mechanics are bad? No, not at all. Some people totally love random encounters, and there are many games that have created similar systems that have the same effect but without the frustration. Like Ni no Kuni or The Last Remnant, where you see the enemy on the field before engaging, or at least give you a useful indication as to how to avoid combat. That's the kind of stuff I can get behind. I understand there are technical limitations with older JRPGs, and you can't be pushing models in every corridor, but when given a high average encounter rate along with vague warnings with no real way to avoid combat consistently, it's the one major thing I would have changed to help make the game less rigid. But it's a good thing I do like the game's combat, cause Lord knows I'm thrown in there a lot against my own will. Either way, Nocturne has to be the most fun I've ever had with any turn-based system, even compared with some of the series' spin-off games. The basis of this enjoyment is the high risk versus reward aspects of the press turn system. Okay, so let's set the stage here. You enter a battle, and depending on how many people in your party determine how many turns you get. The enemy also gets turns, but their numbers can vary. But you got your normal JRPG types of attacks: standard melee, HP draining hard-hitting melees, elemental magics, buff and debuffs with a Diet Coke, you know, the normal stuff. Now, each action takes up a turn, and you hit the thing until it dies, and you gain experience, and bada bing, bada boom, you move on. The catch with the press turn is the massive focus on strength and weaknesses to certain attacks. Most, if not all, enemies will have a weakness to something, and if you manage to hit them with whatever that is, be it magic, a critical attack, or a piercingly annoying voice, then you will only use half of your turn. Therefore, you can extend how many turns you initially have, aka more chances to get in damage and more chances to support your party. Granted, you can't pad it out forever if you keep hitting enemy weaknesses or pass on a turn, since half turns get burned up regardless of what you do, but boy can you abuse it. This also gets taken to the extreme if the enemy misses or hits you with something you completely void or drain, like certain magics and even melee attacks, cause if that happens, the enemy can lose turns and it's back to the slam jam with your attacks. So if you know what your strengths and weaknesses are, along with the enemies, and know how to use your half turns wisely, then you'll be able to eat up all the enemy's turns and just obliterate the poor suckers. However, everything I just said also applies to you. If the enemy hits you with a weakness, they get a half turn. If you miss or use an attack they void, you will lose turns, and it's the enemy's time to beat you into the ground. This is the balance of the game's combat, and it expects you to know that or else you ain't getting very far. Nocturne does not play around, guys. It's unforgiving, punishing, and never eases up. Every rule you are bound to, the enemy is as well, positive or negative, and that's what makes the press turn so fun for me, and also straight up devastating when you make stupid mistakes and are ill-prepared and see that game over screen for the 70th time because you have crap resistance or that enemy does that thing that gives it more turns. It just be like that sometimes. The point is, the system has a super strong core. It requires thoughtful moves which can create some really intense moments, especially in boss fights, and Lord knows there is a ton of nuance that comes with how many abilities you'll be able to gain over the course of the game. As an example, I never really utilized buff and debuffs in other JRPGs that much until Nocturne because they make such a massive difference. Even the tiniest adjustments to your stats can help you just poop on enemies. It's a system that rewards you for paying close attention to the details, whether it be attack pattern, enemy stats, or turn count. Now, your resistance stats and abilities are the core of making it through fights smoothly, and what's nice is how flexible Nocturne can be with changing those stats. Now, the Demi-Fiend runs off of demon tapeworms or whatever, and as you make your way through the game, you'll be able to discover more Magatamas, which allow you to change your strength and weaknesses, along with what abilities you'll learn after leveling up. The Magatama system is great because it doesn't make the Demi-Fiend stagnant. He isn't locked on a progression tree, and you won't feel like you're stuck with a weak sack of bricks when going against a tough boss. Adjusting your Magatama can change the battle dynamic drastically, making what was once an extremely tough boss to a dumb-looking pushover. Now, the Demi-Fiend is your go-to man with a plan, but he's just one piece of the puzzle, because you'll be able to gain new demon party members throughout the game, and how you do that is a little goofy. In the world of Nocturne, you'll be fighting demons, but they ain't just bad guys for you to kick around. Nah, fam, these are creatures with thoughts, feelings, hopes, and dreams who can be reasoned with. And whenever in combat, the Demi-Fiend has the option to talk to enemies and a chance to convince them to join your team. Now, you can only befriend demons of the same level or less, but the dialogue from the demons gives them so much personality. From flirty to abrasive to weird and wacky, the replies are varied and unpredictable, with a dash of what's cooking good looking. Granted, it's not as easy as asking them out on a date or something. Assuming you aren't using any negotiation abilities like brainwash or kidnap, a lot of the time you'll need to give them items or cash or answer questions to convince them to join, and that can be a little annoying when you invest time and money into them only for them to peace out at the last second, like your dad getting a pack of cigarettes and never coming back home. It also kind of sucks that if you are doing the normal talk option, when asked questions by the demons, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason on the right answers, and it seems to be entirely random. The likeliness of demons joining your party can also be affected by the moon cycles, but that's gonna be a little excessive. Plus, you don't always get into fights with the demons you want on a preferred moon cycle, so it's unreliable, basically. I just wish there was more structure or clean-cut answers with the negotiations to make the talks less flimsy, but that's what the abilities are for, I guess. But even if you failed to convince the cool demons to join your party, another way to get what you want is at the Cathedral of Shadows, where you can have Grandpa fuse the demons you do get to create new ones. It's a pretty straightforward process, but it's just another tool to create better parties and to have some diversity with your demons. But with the Magatamas and being able to create and convince demons to join your party, there is an endless amount of ways you can customize your battle strategies. It can be a little daunting, but also kind of hilarious when people get mad at you for having a certain setup because no one's party or character build will be the same. It's like statistically impossible with how much crap you get. Can actually say this is a play it your way kind of game. As long as things die, no one should really be complaining. But even if you manage to create a great party and fly through Nocturne, the game's RNG is a curveball so hard it'll blindside you with even the most prepared parties. There is a big possibility that some of the random encounters are going to get the first swing in and hitting you with a bunch of new stuff you're not prepared for and dying on the first set of turns, giving you no chance to do anything at all, which can feel a little unfair at times. This can also apply to some of the boss attack patterns. As one example, there was a situation with little Toot Toot Man in the later half of my playthrough where I managed to beat the boss first time no problem, but then I had to go somewhere, so I turned off my PlayStation 3, totally forgetting to save the game, so I had to do the fight over again, which was like, okay, no big deal, I beat him first time, no problem, what's the worst that can happen? Suddenly, it took me 7 tries because the RNG gods just weren't having it today. This is probably why you see a lot of arguing over the difficulty of certain bosses, like, oh, I beat them my first try, Lamau, they're so easy, versus, oh my god, no, it's total bullcrap, I died so much. It really can depend on that RNG luck, my dudes. Rather a boss decides to ignore your whole party and uses their only 2 moves to do their mega big screw you attack on you back to back, versus, I don't know, not doing that and spreading the damage out evenly to the party, yeah, it can happen sometimes. Now, to be fair, enemy RNG does keep things interesting, but at the same time, I can feel cheated if it seems like the game is actively trying to piss me off. I have conflicting feelings about Nocturne's RNG, but overall, it's not a deal breaker. It does keep the combat spicy, that's for sure, but it just so happens to make me more bitter than other games with a lot of RNG is all I'm saying. Now, there is so much more to the gameplay, I'm honestly not even scratching the surface of how many bells and whistles Nocturne has hidden up its sleeves. games, but Lord knows I can't cover it all. We're on the time crunch after all. But do know that the gameplay is where Nocturne shines the brightest. The system rewards strategy, and the bosses challenge and change those strategies, so winning against them makes you feel clever. So good job, Nocturne. Bun seal of approval. 10 out of 10 would fight the demons again. High key why I like this game so much. Now let's move on to everyone's favorite superficial aspect, the game's presentation. You know, the looks, the sound, them graphics, everything that adds to the game's flavor. Now, fun fact about me, presentation is a massive factor when it comes to drawing me in. I bought games strictly based off of the soundtracks and the visual styles, and for whatever reason, I have a hard time getting into more 2D games, so I always gravitate towards more 3D stuff because I'm not sure, I'm just picky, that's just how it be. But when it comes to Nocturne, I absolutely love its presentation. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to play it in the first place. Aesthetics-wise, it's a beautiful game. From the creepy reds to the somber blues, the unique look helps draw me into the world way faster than the story does. And because of this specific art style, Nocturne's environments have aged pretty well. Yeah, it's a PlayStation 2 game, but art style over graphics any day, anytime, y'all. And they're not just eye candy either. There are some really subtle touches of the environment that affect the dungeons a lot more than I initially thought. Normally in games, puzzle mechanics in the environment stick out like a sore thumb, but Nocturne makes them seem natural. So natural, in fact, I didn't notice them for a while because they blended in so well. But Nocturne excels in more than just its environments. The game's character designer, Kazuma Kaneko, brought his iconic style to SMT once again, giving the game's characters that are instantly recognizable through their features alone, especially the Demi-Fiend. The dude just looks cool. Heck, Atlas still even thinks so today. God. And while some of the demons could look a little silly compared to the more serious looking ones, there's a ton of enemy variety and it works. Kazuma's art really holds the SMT series together. Something about his style is just really fascinating to me, although I'm not really sure how to frame it. Everyone just looks thoughtful. Maybe it's something about them eyes. I don't know, but boy does it look good. Now, Nocturne's music can be a rather subjective thing. I know some people who straight up hate some of the tracks on the OST, but I really like it for how different it is. The vocals have an early 2000 vibe going on. It can be a little off-putting since they seem so chaotic, but they're weird and memorable, so I ain't complaining. Also, some of the tracks have great instrumentals that kind of remind me of Final Fantasy XIII's 2 sound, which is one of my favorite game OSTs of all time, so there's that. And while some tracks are strictly for setting mood and ambiance, there are others that are just straight up bops. It be killing it out here! Now, I can say other SMT games have had more catchy soundtracks for me, but Nocturne gets the job done and is anything but generic. While we're on the topic of sound though, a tiny thing I wish Nocturne had strictly out of personal preference is voice acting. You see, I have severe dyslexia, and by extension auditory processing disorder, so my reading comprehension is kinda crap, and naturally I always prefer games with voice acting to help me get into the story. Most of the other SMT games not too long after Nocturne have a decent amount of voice acting, and it was one of the reasons why I was able to enjoy them. Like, if Persona 3, 4, and 5 had no voice acting, I would have dipped out of those games so hard, and it's also one of the reasons why I honestly just do not care about social links. I just like the game's main plot because it's being spoon-fed to me with stuff I can actually hear, so the more you know, I guess. So I was kind of disappointed it didn't have any, but at the same time, Nocturne has such a minimal story and dialogue, it didn't prevent me from getting into the game. It's not really a thing that needs voice acting, so I don't really see it as a negative, just something I would have liked because my brain's broke. Regardless of that, though, Atlas games have always excelled in their art direction, and Nocturne is no exception. The darker demonic vibes and looks does my stupid emo heart well. It adds to the tone and gives you a lot of cool stuff to look at, so it'd just be real nice. Now, if it isn't already obvious, I really like Nocturne, but I've talked your ear off about the big stuff, so allow me to name a few basic observations that are a little all over the place. Some negative, some positive, so hang tight and listen up, because we're going to be going off for a second. The UI is not the most intuitive thing I've seen. It's a lot of back and forth in menus for basic things like checking your party's abilities and crap. Also, you can't check their stuff in battle when switching out demons, so it just feels like creature roulette all the time. You think I have everyone's stuff memorized, Atlas? I got new demons coming out the yin-yang non-stop, so it'd be nice to see those deeds, thank you. As useless as the falling minigame in the Labyrinth of Amala is, I really like it because it makes you feel really, really underground, which adds to the atmosphere and the anxiety once you realize you have no idea how to get out of this place, so that's fun. Why the Demi-Fiend the only one who can use items in combat? Make stuff kind of complicated sometimes. I got all these cool items I never touch because I gotta think about my priorities of not dying. I like how there's just a lot of open space, you know? There's a ton of rooms and extra floors you never really have to go to. They're just kinda there. So the world actually feels like a world, not some planned out adventure map where everything has a purpose. It also adds to the mystery part of the game, so that's neat. Nocturne can be a little bit of a grind fest. Personally, I don't mind that much grind in my life once I get into the groove, but I never felt safe enough to grind as you go through the labyrinths because unless you have like a ton of SP MP and health items, you'll run out of juice about halfway in because of the encounter rate. So I took the safe route a lot and escaped like every battle, solved the puzzle, and just grinded near healing points and saved. Although later in the game, I got MP Drain and Media on the Demi-Fiend, so he never really ran out of MP and was my go-to after battle healer, so I guess there is a few ways around it, but it's still a tad grindy, but then again, what JRPG isn't? And that's about it. I'm sure there's other stuff that has escaped my mind, but hey, if you got something, let me know in the comments. Lord knows we got a few things rolling around in our heads. Moving on. Now, even though Nocturne can be a very polarizing experience for people, I know where my personal experience lies. I got into Shin Megami Tensei pretty late in my life. They are games my parents would have never let me touch with a 10-foot pole growing up because the devil be scary and crap, but considering their difficulty curve and mature themes, I'm glad I've gotten to them as an adult so I can appreciate them for what they are. Nocturne has its old school roots. It's punishing and demanding, but it's also different and interesting. No, the game is not for everyone, but that's kind of a good thing. Some games shouldn't strive to be all-pleasing and accessible because it deludes ideas that could be loved by a neglected minority rather than just tolerated by the majority. Niches need to exist to keep ideas fresh, to create something weird, and eventually over time perfected to the point it becomes the new trendsetter. Nocturne is a good game that tested my patience and made me check a few controllers, but after getting through it, I want to play it again to see how I've improved as a player, along with playing other SMT spin-offs that Nocturne helped pave the way for. It's not perfect and it's no masterpiece, but it's a game that only really gets credit nowadays for being difficult, but that's because it was the start of something new in the West, and people just didn't have the tools to get into it and appreciate it like they can now. The internet just be wild like that. But I hope this video showcases why it's worth giving a shot, because it's one of those games you just gotta try, even if it's only for a little bit. Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is available on PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 on the PlayStation Network store for $10. You want to use your glow-in-the-dark body to beat the living snot out of Dante from the Devil May Cry series? Go for it, kiddo. You got my A-OK all the way. And anyone who gives you crap for figuring things out on your own pace and, God forbid, actually trying new things can eat my big, buttery, fat Yo, yiggity yo, welcome to the end of the video. I want to give a special thank you to Antlion Audio for sending me a Mod Mic 5 review package to test out. This is for their new line of attachable microphones for headsets. It's a really neat thing because I actually use, like, you know, those nice half-a-daily headphones like my Audio-Technica sets, and this mic is great for attaching to pre-existing headsets and stuff, and so far it's my go-to travel mic. So thank you, Antlion, for sending me the mic. It is great, and also, yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. It's a cool little dingy. Now I don't have to go buy a bulky headset when I just want to, like, I don't know, leave my desk for 5 minutes, so that's neat. And also I want to give a special thank you to the people who sent me some stuff in my P.O. box recently, to the person who sent me the Rocket Power game. That was neat, was not expecting that. And a big thank you to Endurance for sending me a Keyblade with a lovely note. This thing is great. I've seen these around a lot, and it's really nice to actually own one. So thank you so much, Endurance, for sending me this. I greatly appreciate it. So yeah, that's it. That's the end of the video. Nocturne took me a while to beat. I essentially played the majority of the game on stream, so I plucked at it over the course of like a year. But over time, I eventually did it, and now here we are, me talking about it. I know this is a long time coming for a lot of people, but that's it. That's all I got. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Twitch. I have a Patreon if you want to like chuck money on my head and get some cool stuff out of it. I do giveaways there. I have some other neat perks you might want to check out, but follow me on social media or something. That's it. That's all I got. Nocturne's a video game. Bye-bye.